On my parents' 40th anniversary, my mother shoved my 8-year-old daughter's gift across the table and called me her biggest mistake in front of 60 people. What nobody in that room knew was that inside that cream colored box was the one thing standing between my parents and losing their house forever. 5 days after they threw us out, they wouldn't stop calling because the daughter they spent 33 years treating like a burden was the only one who could save them. There are some moments in life that split your story into two parts: the person you were before it happened and the person you became after. Before that night, I was still hoping, still making excuses, still telling myself maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they'd see me. Maybe this time they'd stop treating me like the wrong child who somehow kept showing up in their family photo. But after that night, after what happened in that rented hall under soft gold lights and fake smiles, and a banner that said 40 years, I finally understood something I should have learned much earlier. Some people would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong about you. My name is Hannah. I'm 33 years old. I'm a real estate attorney, a single mother, and for most of my life, I was the child my family tolerated instead of loved. In my family, the hierarchy was simple. My older brother Derek was the pride, the golden child, the one they pointed to when they wanted to talk about legacy and promise and family success. I was the inconvenience. Derek was 4 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, the difference in how we were treated wasn't subtle. His trophies were displayed in the living room. His grades were praised at the dinner table. His birthdays had themes, decorations, matching plates, organized guest lists, and a mother who looked genuinely happy while planning them. Mine came with grocery store cake, a generic card signed by both parents in my mother's handwriting, and the clear feeling that everyone involved was just trying to get through it. My mother, Diane, never had to scream to make me feel unwanted. That would have been easier to understand. Her cruelty was quieter than that, precise, controlled. Like she had mastered the art of making me feel like I was taking up space that had already been promised to someone more important. When I was 11 years old, she said something to me that stayed in my bones for the next 2 decades. She was standing in the kitchen with a chipped blue coffee mug in her hand, and she said, in the calmest voice possible, "You were always my biggest mistake, Hannah. I don't mean it ugly. I mean it factual." That's the kind of sentence that changes the temperature of your entire childhood. You don't just remember the words, you remember the mug, the light, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the background. Because part of you knows, even while it's happening, that this is going to live inside you for a very long time. My father, Roger, was different, but not better. He wasn't openly cruel. He was just absent in all the moments that mattered. He let my mother define reality, and then he lived inside her version of it. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't step in when I needed him. He loved me in the most distant, useless way possible, politely, passively, without risk. And when one parent is cruel and the other parent watches it happen and does nothing, the silence becomes its own kind of betrayal. So I grew up learning the math. Derek came first. I came when convenient. Derek was the investment. I was the overhead. And the truth is, I didn't spend my life hating them for it. I just got tired. Tired of performing gratitude for scraps. Tired of hoping every holiday would be different. Tired of thinking if I worked hard enough, succeeded enough, stayed soft enough, I could finally earn the kind of love that should have been given freely. At 25, I got pregnant. The father disappeared almost as soon as the word positive entered the room. My parents' response wasn't concern, it wasn't comfort, it was a conference call. My mother called it another mistake. My father said they couldn't help me financially and hoped I understood. I did understand. I understood that I was on my own, so I acted accordingly. During the day, I worked as a title clerk in a small real estate office. At night, I studied for the bar. My daughter Lily slept in a pack and play beside my textbooks while I highlighted legal language and ate instant noodles because diapers cost more than dignity. I failed the bar twice. Then I passed. I became a licensed attorney. I kept going. By the time I was 32, I was handling commercial closings worth millions of dollars. I had built a career from almost nothing. No trust fund, no safety net, no family rescue, just work. Endless work. But when you build yourself from scratch, you develop a dangerous reflex. You become the one who knows how to carry weight. You become the person who solves problems, who manages pressure, who keeps moving while other people fall apart. And that's not always a strength. Sometimes it turns into a trap. Because once people realize you can carry things, they start handing you loads they were never supposed to make yours. Lily was 8 by the time this story happened. She was bright and loving and open hearted in that terrifying way children are, where they trust without checking the math first. She wanted grandparents, not the complicated conditional kind, the real kind, the kind her classmates talked about. She wanted cookies and stories and warm holiday traditions and adults who looked happy when she walked into a room. She didn't understand why ours felt cold. She only knew she wanted it to be better. Then the invitation arrived. Cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering. Roger and Diane Jagger celebrating 40 years of love, laughter, and family. I stared at it for 2 days. Lily found it on the kitchen counter and lit up like I had just handed her a ticket to something magical. "We're going to Grandma and Grandpa's party?" she asked. She said it the way children ask questions they've already decided deserve a yes. I almost threw the invitation away. I almost chose peace. But by then, I knew something they didn't know I knew, and I had already decided what I was going to do with that information. A few weeks before the party, my father called me directly. That alone was enough to make me sit up straighter. He never called directly. If he wanted something said, my mother usually delivered it for him, complete with tone and editing. So when I heard his voice on the line asking about the housing market, I knew something was wrong. He tried to sound casual. He asked what a house like theirs might be worth these days. I asked if everything was okay. He said yes too quickly, then he hung up. 2 days later, I was reviewing the weekly foreclosure docket at work when I saw an address that made my hands go cold. 1847 Birchwood Lane, my parents' house. I pulled the full file and read it twice. Then a third time. The notice of default was real. The foreclosure sale date was set. They were weeks away from losing the house I grew up in. The house where my grandmother lived in the back bedroom and braided my hair before school. The house where roses still bloomed along the fence because she had planted them there herself. That house was heading to auction, and nobody had said a word to me. I started digging through the file because that's what I do. Numbers don't lie the way people do. 14 months earlier, my parents had taken out a home equity line of credit against a house that had been paid off for years. The amount was $187,000. Then my father had surgery, and medical bills piled up. Their retirement income couldn't support the debt. Payments were missed. The lender filed. But the medical bills didn't explain the beginning. The money had gone somewhere else first. I traced the paperwork, and the answer led exactly where I should have expected it to lead. Derek. The money had gone into funding my brother's restaurant. Suddenly, all the pieces fit. Derek's flashy social media posts about his new venture. My mother sharing every grand opening photo like he'd opened the first restaurant in human history. The silence after it all disappeared. The missing explanation. The family pretending none of it happened. They had mortgaged their house to fund Derek's dream. The dream failed. The money vanished. The debt remained. And still they said nothing to me. Because saying something to me would mean admitting that the child they spent years dismissing was the one person capable of fixing the disaster their favorite child created. I won't pretend I wasn't angry. I was furious. A rational person would have walked away. A healthier person probably too. But then I thought about my grandmother, the only person in that house who had ever made me feel like I belonged there. And I thought about Lily, who still tied ribbons onto gifts for people who barely deserved access to her smile. I knew I couldn't save my parents for their sake, but I could save that house for what it represented. I could save it because some things are worth protecting, even when the people inside them haven't been kind to you. So I contacted the lender. I negotiated the purchase of the note. I used almost everything I had saved in 7 years of working nights, weekends, and overtime. I bought the debt itself, which meant I now had the legal power to stop the foreclosure or let it continue. Then I prepared the paperwork. I drafted a satisfaction of note that would release the lien, cancel the debt, and leave the house in their names free and clear. I wrote a plain English letter explaining exactly what I had done. I put it all in a manila envelope. Then I put the envelope inside a cream-colored gift box. Lily tied a navy ribbon around it herself. It came out a little crooked. She didn't care. She tucked in a handmade card with two stick figures under a wobbly arch of hearts and wrote, in her best crooked cursive, "Happy 40 years, Grandma and Grandpa." And somewhere inside me, against all evidence, hope came back. Stupid, stubborn hope. Maybe this would be the moment things changed. Maybe they would see what I'd done and finally understand who I was. Maybe Lily would get the grandparents she had imagined. Maybe the truth would become too obvious to ignore. The week before the party made it clear I was still kidding myself. My cousin called to warn me that my Aunt Carol had been telling everyone I kept Lily away from my parents out of spite. The truth was much simpler. I stopped visiting because every time I brought Lily over, my mother found a way to diminish her too. Her hair was too messy. She talked too much. She reminded her of me. On our last visit, my mother looked at Lily arranging flowers on the table and muttered that she had the wrong father's chin. That was enough for me. I set a boundary. But in families like mine, boundaries always get rewritten as cruelty by the people who benefit from you having none. Then Derek called, talking about some new business concept like failure was just a branding phase. He never mentioned the house. He never mentioned the debt. He never asked how our parents were really doing. Then my mother called a few days before the party to confirm I was still coming. And before hanging up, she said, "Don't make this about you, Hannah. I remember looking at the unsigned release on my desk and thinking, you have no idea who you're talking to." The night of the anniversary party, the venue was exactly the kind of place people rent when they care more about appearances than solvency. White tablecloths, gold decorations, catered food, a DJ in the corner, a cake too expensive for people who were quietly drowning in debt. I did the math instinctively and guessed they had spent thousands they absolutely did not have. Lily wore a blue dress because Grandma likes blue. On the drive there, she asked me if Grandma would like the present. I told her she'd be crazy not to. I meant it in more ways than one. We walked in holding hands, and within a minute and a half, Aunt Carol found us. She gave me that smile people use when they want witnesses to think they're kind. And then she turned to a nearby table and said, loud enough for me to hear, "The cold one finally showed up." I moved Lily to my other side. My parents were at the head table. My mother was adjusting place cards and silverware as if table settings could repair a collapsing life. My father was greeting people. Neither of them noticed us arrive. Later, on my way to the restroom, I passed the hallway near the kitchen and heard their voices. They were arguing. Derek had apparently promised an investor 2 more weeks. My father sounded exhausted. My mother sounded sharp. Then I heard my father say maybe they should have asked me for help. And my mother snapped back, "No, we are not asking her. We are not giving her the satisfaction." That word hit me so hard I had to stop walking. Satisfaction. As if helping them would be some kind of ego trip for me. As if asking me to save the house was more humiliating than actually losing it. As if I was the danger, not the fantasy they had mortgaged their future on. I went back to the table and sat down beside the cream-colored box. My father eventually stood to give his speech. He praised my mother. He praised marriage. He praised family. Then he praised Derek, calling him the son who had never given them a day of worry. I sat there and thought about the foreclosure notice, the restaurant failure, the six-figure debt, and the unbelievable weight of that sentence. I was sitting there with the power to save their home, and he was still worshiping the son who had nearly cost them everything. That was the moment something in me stopped reaching. I didn't break. I just stopped. Stopped hoping they would become who I needed them to be. Stopped imagining some final act of generosity would rewrite decades of history. After cake, I knelt beside Lily and reminded her what we practiced. She nodded, serious and brave. I handed her the box. She carried it with both hands toward the head table while the room slowly quieted. There is something about a child bringing a gift that makes everyone soften, at least for a second. Lily stepped up in front of my parents, held out the box, and said in her clear little voice, "Happy anniversary, Grandma and Grandpa. We made it just for you." For one tiny second, I thought maybe this was it. My father looked almost softened. Then my mother looked at Lily, looked at the box, looked at me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. The old program, the old story. Hannah wants something. Hannah is trying to make this about herself. Hannah is an obligation. Hannah is the mistake. She put her hand flat on the cream-colored box and shoved it sideways across the table. The ribbon snagged on a fork. Lily's handmade card slipped free and fluttered to the floor. My daughter's hand stayed in the air for a second, empty and open. Then my mother looked straight at me and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "You were always my biggest mistake." The silence after that was unbearable. It was heavy, public, final. Lily pressed against my side. My father stood up. And for one pathetic second, some old childlike part of me thought maybe now he would do something. Maybe now he would finally say enough. Instead, he looked at me and said, "We don't need your gift. Take it and get out." And that's when I laughed. I didn't laugh because it was funny. I laughed because I finally understood the truth in full. I could give these people everything, and it still would not be enough because the problem had never been what I offered. The problem was that accepting anything from me would require them to admit they had been wrong about me for 33 years. My mother looked furious and asked what was so funny. I looked at the box, then at the room, then at both of them, and said, "Do you want to know what's in the box?" Every eye in that hall locked onto me. I picked up the manila envelope and held it in the air. Then I told the truth. I told them I had found out 3 weeks earlier that their house on Birchwood Lane was in foreclosure. I told them about the $187,000 line of credit. I told them the money had gone into Derek's failed restaurant. I told them the lender had already filed, and the auction date was set for June 20. I told them that 3 weeks earlier, I had purchased the note from the lender with my own savings. Every dollar I had earned working nights and weekends, while they told everyone at church I was the daughter who walked away. I told them the envelope contained the assignment of the note to me, and a satisfaction of note I had prepared to sign that night, which would have forgiven the debt, canceled the foreclosure, and left them with a clear title to their house. Then I looked at Lily and said, "My 8-year-old daughter carried that gift across this room for you, and you shoved it away and called me your biggest mistake." You could feel the room changing around me. The lies were falling apart in real time. Aunt Carol looked sick. My brother couldn't look up. My mother went pale. My father sat down like his legs had stopped working. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had not performed. I had simply told the truth, and it was more devastating than any scene I could have made. My mother finally stammered something about how I couldn't just do this. I said quietly, "I can. I hold the note. Your house, your debt, my choice." Then I took the unsigned release, folded it, and slipped it into my blazer pocket. I bent down, picked up Lily's card from the floor, and tucked it into my jacket, too. Then I lifted my daughter into my arms. My father called after me. My mother stood up and shouted that it was their house. I turned at the door and said, "It was your gift. You chose differently." Then I walked out. The parking lot was dark and quiet. Inside the hall, bass from the DJ speakers thudded weakly through the walls, like the remains of a celebration that had collapsed under its own lies. I buckled Lily into her seat. She looked up at me and asked if Grandma was going to be okay. I smoothed her hair and told her Grandma was going to have to figure some things out. Then I drove us home. The calls began that night. My mother cried into voicemail, not with remorse, but with outrage that I had humiliated her in front of the church crowd she cared about. My father called the next morning, angry first, then desperate, admitting they were wrong and asking me to come back so we could talk about the house. Derek called twice. The second voicemail just said, "Fix this, Hannah," as if I existed to clean up the wreckage of his life. Over the next 5 days, the phone kept ringing. My mother called 14 times. My father called 9. Derek called twice. Neighbors reached out. Cousins reached out. People who had heard only one version of me for years were suddenly seeing another. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted revenge, because for once I needed them to sit with the truth before I handed them any kind of relief. I needed them to understand that I was not going to become cruel just because they had been. But I also was not going to save them in a way that left my daughter vulnerable to the same pattern. On the 6th day, I called my father. I told him I was not going to make them homeless. That had never been my intention. But if I released the debt, it would be on my terms. I had already drafted the new paperwork. They would place the house in a trust. They could live there for the rest of their lives. But when both of them were gone, the property would go to Lily. Not Derek. Not Derek's next business idea. Not Derek's next disaster. Lily. The granddaughter whose gift had been shoved away. My father agreed almost immediately. My mother took 2 more days. When she finally called, her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. She didn't offer a clean apology. But she did say one honest thing. She said she had been afraid of me. Afraid I would become everything she wasn't. Afraid I would turn into the kind of woman who could survive what broke her and still stand up straight. And then she said the part that mattered most. "And you did. And I couldn't stand it. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't healing. But it was truth. Maybe the first real truth she had ever spoken to me." The documents were signed, notarized, recorded. The foreclosure was canceled. The debt was released. The house stayed on Birchwood Lane. My grandmother's roses kept blooming along the fence. And Lily's handmade card, the one with the smudged stick figures and uneven hearts, I framed it and hung it in our hallway. Because my daughter's love doesn't belong on the floor at the feet of people who don't know how to hold it. As for me, I stopped waiting for my mother to give me back a worth she never had the power to take. That was the real ending of the story. Not the legal documents, not the trust, not the phone calls. The real ending was internal. I finally understood that being unloved by people committed to misunderstanding you is not proof that you are hard to love. It is proof that they need their version of you more than they want the truth. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop begging. You stop auditioning. You stop bleeding for people who call it family but only mean ownership. If there's one thing I learned from that night, it's this: the strongest thing you can do is tell the truth. Protect your child and stop asking broken people for permission to matter. Because the moment you stop asking, something powerful happens. The lie loses its grip. The shame stops being yours. And the people who built their identity around underestimating you are forced to face what you became without them. So, no, I was never the mistake. I was just the one they could not control. And in the end, that made all the difference.